What's up, YouTube friends and subscribers? Retro Gamer here with another YouTube narration. Now, recently it was announced that the Capcom shareholders were voting to end the takeover defense, so now the company is open for potential purchase. And I wanted to give my 2 cents in on this. I think it's a good thing. Last time I heard, Capcom I think only had like $100 million or something. I don't remember the exact number. So the fact that they were in such financial straits, I was kind of expecting a buyout at some point. So now it has the potential to be bought out. And I know that people are going to give me slack, but I really think that Nintendo should buy them. And here's the reason why. So hear me out before you start ending the video, or commenting about, how I'm an idiot or stuff like that. Try to hear me out with this. This is just from my perspective, okay? There's a lot of good companies out there that could buy Capcom, okay? And as long as there's a company out there that buys the Capcom properties and uses them well, I don't care. I mean, it could be Ubisoft, it could be Activision, it could be anybody. But the reason why I think it should be Nintendo, well, a few reasons. First of all, let's look at some of the franchises that Capcom owns. And let's think about how many of these games have been on Nintendo platforms already. Street Fighter. Well, Street Fighter was on the 3DS and it was on the Super Nintendo. So, and Nintendo used to have Killer Instinct. They used to have their own official brand of fighting game until Microsoft took Rare. So if Nintendo bought Capcom, not only would they then have the rights to create exclusive Street Fighter content, which would help sell their consoles, but I believe that Nintendo would take very good care of the franchise. Next, Ace Attorney. We already know that Phoenix Wright is notorious for being on the DS and 3DS respectively and all this stuff. I mean, Capcom makes the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney games, and they are notorious for being on Nintendo systems. I don't recall, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just cannot recall off the top of my head anywhere where Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney has shown up on another platform. Resident Evil. Again, Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 4, especially Resident Evil 4, considered to be one of the best Resident Evils of all time, and it showed up on GameCube first. It brought Nintendo back from the brink because they had an exclusive deal with Capcom for Resident Evil games. That's why you got the Resident Evil remake, you ended up with Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 4. And all three of those games are considered to be top-notch Resident Evil games, and they all showed up on GameCube consoles. So think about that for a minute. Some of the better Resident Evil games, Resident Evil Revelations for an example, all showed up on Nintendo systems first. But the ones that are considered to be horrible, like 5 and 6, they showed up elsewhere and they never came to Nintendo consoles. So think about that for a minute. You don't think that if Nintendo owned Resident Evil, that they wouldn't take very good care of it? They wouldn't make it a grand experience? They have a ton of money that they could throw at Capcom and say, here, make this the best you possibly can. Take 5 years to develop it. Make it as good as the Resident Evil remake. Make it as good as Resident Evil. Get away from the action, because we're not about that. We're about the experience. Make it a good game. Next, Monster Hunter. Obviously, Capcom has gone to Nintendo for Monster Hunter. I mean, the last two to be made, 3 Ultimate, came out for the 3DS and the Wii U, and 4, even though it's not out in the States yet, even though it's not here yet is also on the 3DS. It's not like they were taking Monster Hunter and trying to make it for the Vita or for the PS3 or for the PS4. They made it specifically for the 3DS. And then Mega Man, which granted has been on multiple platforms. It's been on Sony platforms, it's been on other platforms and stuff like that. But where did Mega Man get its start, and where is it most notorious for being at? Nintendo. The first, like, what, 7 Mega Man, 6 Mega Mans or something like that were on Nintendo platforms, not to mention that Mega Man X was notorious for the Super Nintendo. And then the last two, like 9 and 10, I think that they did better on WiiWare. I'm not too sure of the numbers on that. But the fact is that Mega Man, even Mega Man recently going over to Smash Brothers, is a good indication that Nintendo has interest in Mega Man. And you know that Nintendo would take good care of their franchises. I mean, Nintendo, I've talked about this before with Platinum Games. I remember reading somewhere that Platinum Games basically wants to be bought out by Nintendo, like they did with Retro. And they want Nintendo to have a majority share in Platinum Games. And I remember reading somewhere, I don't remember where the link is, it was like last year where I read it, so I don't even know where to find it, so I can't even put the link in there, and I'm sorry I can't do that. But I believe I remember reading somewhere that the president of Platinum Games basically wanted Nintendo to own them so they can be like Retro and they can make games exclusive for their consoles. And I think the reason why, and the reason why Sega has also decided to partner with Nintendo, is because of the partnerships that Nintendo creates. I mean, look at Bayonetta 2. I talked about this a little bit in I think some of my last other videos. Nintendo basically says, do whatever. They're very hands-off when it comes to third-party developers. They just gave Platinum the money to make Bayonetta 2, make it your way. I mean, Bayonetta 2 has probably been in development for like, what, 3 years? You don't think that if Microsoft or Sony had Bayonetta 2, that they would have tried to push it out for their PS4 launch? Or their Xbox One launch to try and get the sales? They would try to rush it. They try to get it out there even if it wasn't a complete game. But Nintendo, they didn't try to get Bayonetta 2 out there at launch. They're like, get it done whenever you can. Nintendo, at least from my point of view, has very good relationships with their developers. People that work hand in hand with them, they typically give them money, they typically help them out, they typically say take your time and make the game the way you want it. They don't really try to rush them. And even Nintendo themselves would rather take like a Zelda game or a Metroid game and hold it off for a couple of years and perfect it and make it this artful living world and make it the best that they possibly can, rather than be like, look, we got a new system coming out, we got to get the Star Foxes, we got to get the Metroids, we got to get the Zelda, we got to get all that out there so people will buy this within the first year, and then we don't care what happens afterwards. That's what I'm saying. So think about Mega Man and Resident Evil and Street Fighter all being brought back to their former glory because Nintendo can give Capcom a few more $1 million to help produce the game and make it better. I think it's a win-win situation. Capcom would want to make the systems work to their fullest potential. They'd want to push the graphical capable limits of both the 3DS and the Wii U. And Nintendo would benefit from that. Because not only would you have a game like Resident Evil Revelations, which looked really good on the 3DS, and Capcom did that, not only would you have more games along that grandeur, but Nintendo would then benefit because, look, you could only get this Resident Evil on a Nintendo platform. So they sell systems, people buy Resident Evil, so Capcom gets money, Nintendo gets money, and it's a win-win. And let's face it, Nintendo could use all the franchises that they could get. I mean, if they had an exclusive fighter, like what they used to with Killer Instinct through Street Fighter, if they had an exclusive RPG through Monster Hunter, an exclusive platformer other than Mario with like something like Mega Man, and if they had an exclusive survival horror game with the likes of Resident Evil, I really do think that Nintendo's platforms would sell. Capcom would push the capabilities of the system so they would always look their best. And Capcom would get money again, not only through Nintendo making money off them systems, but people buying their games because they know they're getting good quality games. Now again, this is just my opinion. I don't care if Sony buys them. I don't care if Microsoft buys them, as long as the franchises are taken care of. If Activision buys Street Fighter, make good Street Fighter games. If Ubisoft buys Resident Evil, as long as you make killer Resident Evil games that are in lieu of what I talked about before, that are like Resident Evil 4, the Resident Evil remake, Resident Evil 0, even Resident Evil 2. If you can make games along those lines again, I don't care who buys them. I'm just thinking that because I have such a good relationship with Nintendo. You know, they were the first system that I bought. I bought a Nintendo Entertainment, well, my parents bought a Nintendo Entertainment System. It was the first system that I got my hands on, and every time I've owned a Nintendo system, I have been nothing but pleased with the games and the experiences that I've gotten from those. So, and when I see things like, okay, here's Resident Evil, and then here's Resident Evil on the GameCube, and the difference that it made. You know, here's Resident Evil 3 for the PlayStation, and then here's Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube, and the difference that it made, you know? Like, the amount of attention that Resident Evil 4 got for being on the GameCube. People bought GameCubes just to play Resident Evil 4, you know? I mean, come on. Imagine that happening again. Imagine you wanting off to buy a Wii U so you can get Resident Evil 7. You know? Imagine having to get your hands on a 3DS to play the next Street Fighter, and just because of how awesome it is. Or imagine you already own a 3DS and you feel, man, you know what? It's kind of a lackluster collection here. I like a lot of the games that come out for it, but nothing up my alley. And then they announce the next Mega Man. Imagine if they announced like a Mega Man remake. Or imagine if, because Nintendo owns it, you get Mega Man Legends 3, finally. Imagine that. The amount of potential that this merger would have would be phenomenal. And I think that it would benefit Nintendo and Capcom both. Only because Nintendo could always use more franchises to help sell their platforms. This way they come out with more releases. Rather than just like, look, we got Mario, Metroid, and Zelda, and it takes us 5 years to make each one. While we're in the middle of making a Metroid game or a Zelda game, they could be working on a Resident Evil game. You know? Plus, it could always be helpful that they have Retro working on one thing, Grizo working on another thing, Platinum Games, if they bought them, working on another thing, and Capcom working on another thing, and then Nintendo's working on one thing. So in like a year's time, you have like 6 really big games coming out a year. Can you imagine that? Like an awesome new title from Nintendo coming out like every 2-3 months. It would be phenomenal. I really do think that's beneficial. Now, make sure that you sound off with what you think. Who do you think would be best to buy to buy Capcom? Because I think it's Nintendo, but really, if anybody was to buy Capcom, I just think that Nintendo has the money, they have the experience, and they have the spirit. Because they're all about making games first. They're not about, let's rush this thing out to make sales. They're not about, let's push the graphical limitations of this just for the sake of doing it. You know? And they're not all about cashing in just for the sake of making more money. They would rather have... So I can just imagine them taking a couple of years to work on a Resident Evil game to perfect it. I can imagine them making the next Street Fighter a really good game. Plus, here's something else that you probably didn't consider. Smash Brothers. Smash Brothers, Smash Brothers. If it has shown up on a Nintendo system, it's more likely to be included in Smash Brothers. And if Nintendo owns Capcom, they don't have to go and beg Capcom for permission to put Ryu in Street Fighter. They don't have to go and ask for permission to put Leon Kennedy in Smash Brothers or Phoenix Wright in Smash Brothers. You see what I'm saying? So think about some of your favorite Capcom franchises and characters, and then imagine them appearing in Smash Brothers because Nintendo owns them. That's another really good reason. That's another potential, like, just bomb dropping moment. But anyway, like I said, I've gone on about this enough. I've gone around in circles, and I think I've made my point relatively clear. I really do think that just because of the amount of money that Nintendo owns and the amount of money that Capcom needs and the relationship that Nintendo usually has with its developers, like look at Retro. They didn't force Retro to make another Metroid game, even though that's what everybody was asking for, and even though they knew that that would have made the system sell if they announced, look, the secret game that Retro's been working on is another Metroid Prime. That would have instantly have sold like 11 million Wii U's. Instead, they asked, what do you want to make, Retro? And Retro said, well, we already had the engine, and we have some ideas left over from the old Donkey Kong Country. We want to make another one. And that's what they did. They don't force things down people's throat. They don't force, they wouldn't force Capcom to create a Resident Evil or another Street Fighter unless they wanted to, and then they would work hand in hand with them to make it the best game that they can. That's how I feel, of course. And again, as long as anybody buys it who takes care of the franchises, I don't care. I was just speaking my opinion because I really do think that Nintendo has the resources and they have the spirit to make really good games. And I've already mentioned enough examples through this video. I don't think I need to go on about it anymore. So thanks for listening. If you've listened this far, make sure that you share your thoughts on the matter. Who do you think should buy Capcom? And what do you think about the potential of Nintendo buying Capcom? Do you think it would be a good idea? Do you think it could really benefit Capcom? Or do you think it's just a horrible idea and somebody else should buy Capcom? There is no wrong answer in this, people. It's all just opinions. So make sure that you share yours and have yourself a good rest of the day. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.